Dollar. Dirt on money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yup, let's get original crew, man. We're back. We have he switched to the title. This title we got, and then I don't know, the most insane court case of all time. Y'all might see a different title. Sorry, it is what it is. But we got a new Mr. Ballen for y'all today. But it's on the right. You want to just go ahead and get into it?
Let's get into it.
Make sure you check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go if you want to first support. All you have to do is check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's visuals,
like it with a thumbs up.
Let's hop into it. Let's check this one out. Let's see what it's about. Let's get it.
Divine intervention is when a deity, so God or a god, becomes actively involved in human affairs here on Earth. Now, of course, we don't know if divine intervention is a real thing, but today's story certainly offers compelling evidence that it might be. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please use all your life savings to build this beautiful luxury home right on the coastline to be used as an Airbnb, and then finally, after years of work, when it's all done, tell the like button that they can stay in the Airbnb for the first time, to the first guest, all for free. Go enjoy it, but don't tell them about all the human-hating, highly aggressive honey badgers you've hid under all the beds. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into...
He said something about a honey badger?
Yeah.
I low-key...
Basically, don't tell the people that you let stay in your Airbnb that you hid honey badgers under the bed. Yeah.
I'm sorry, y'all. Like, my head... I was here, then I went... And
you
then,
went somewhere and came back.
That's so annoying, bro. And when you don't try to, your mind just drift.
Yeah, I do it often.
You do it. Yeah, that's facts.
Aggressive honey badgers you've hid under all the beds. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. Late on the evening of November 15th, 1884, a 20-year-old man named John Lee helped his sister Elizabeth clear the dining room table in the English manor where they both worked. John was a butler at this manor, and his sister Elizabeth was a cook. And the manor itself had a name. It was called the Glen, and it was this gorgeous property right on the beach in the seaside community in England. Now, years ago, the Glen had been much more grand, and in fact, the King and Queen of England had at one point came to stay at the Glen. But recently, the Glen and the family who owned it had fallen on hard times. The staff was down to a skeleton crew of just John, his sister Elizabeth, and 2 elderly maids, which meant virtually all the physical labor at this property fell to John to take care of. So, on this night, John was lugging a huge pile of heavy china in his arms to bring out to the kitchen, and as he was doing this, he was trying to talk to his sister, who was also kind of helping clear the table, about an upcoming dinner party they were going to host at the Glen for some very important lawyers and politicians. But as John tried to talk to Elizabeth just wasn't really reacting. She was kind of staring off into space, and she was only carrying 1 or maybe 2 plates off the dining room table, while John is carrying like 50. And so John was becoming really annoyed with his sister. I mean, she's not really helping, and she's ignoring him. And so John was about to complain to his sister about her behavior when suddenly she turned around and she apologized to him and said, "You know what? I'm sorry I'm acting this way. I just don't feel very good, and I really think I should go lie down." Now, John was about to be really annoyed at this, but then he noticed his sister had her hands kind of reflexively over her stomach. And John knew his sister was pregnant, and so suddenly he felt like, okay, the reason she's acting this way must be because of her pregnancy. And so he did not press the issue. Now, you need to understand that Elizabeth did not tell John that she was pregnant, nor did she tell anybody else in the house. because the owners of the Glen were very traditional and very religious, and they almost certainly would not approve of Elizabeth's pregnancy because she wasn't married. At the time in England, it was not okay to have babies out of wedlock. It was viewed as like this totally taboo thing that you should never do. But despite Elizabeth's best efforts to conceal her pregnancy, John and the other two elderly maids very quickly realized what was going on, because every morning they would see Elizabeth vomiting because of morning sickness. Damn. And so when they approached her and said, hey, it looks like you're pregnant, what's going on here? Elizabeth refused to talk about it. She didn't.
I knew she was pregnant anyway. When she only grabbed 2 plates, he grabbed 50. Why women do that? Why y'all do that? I'm just a little pump. I'm like, why y'all do that? Some of y'all find out got a little bun in the oven. I can't live nothing.
You are crazy.
I can't live nothing. You be like, girl, you eat up 2 minutes pregnant. It's a bun cooking in the oven.
I'm so done.
Admit to being pregnant. She just kind of said, leave me alone. I mean, John didn't even know who the father was. Like, Elizabeth did not want to talk to anyone about her pregnancy. But despite all that, John and the other two maids really wanted to support Elizabeth and help her get through this pregnancy, without being found out and potentially fired because of it. So when Elizabeth said to John that she just wanted to go lie down because she was feeling sick, he didn't press the issue, and he just told her, you know what? I'm fine. I'll finish up. You go lay down. I hope you feel better. By 11 p.m., John was nearly done with all of his chores and he was getting ready for bed when one of the elderly maids came into the room and told John it was time for their nightly prayers. And without any hesitation, John put down the silverware that he was polishing and followed the maid into the living room where one of the owners of the Glen was waiting in her nightclothes. The owner was a 68-year-old woman named Emma Case, and at night she really liked to lead a nightly prayer with her staff. It was something she really enjoyed doing. Now, John was not a very religious person, but he really cared about Emma, and so he agreed to do these nightly prayers really just to make her happy. I mean, after all, Emma had basically saved him on multiple occasions. John had begun working for Emma 6 years earlier when he was just 14 years old. And John, he was kind of like a rough kid and a troublemaker, but Emma, she just had a soft spot for him. And at some point, when John admitted to Emma that he was really interested in traveling the world someday, Emma would help him get into the British Royal Navy. And for 2 years, John very happily served in the military and did get to see the world. But at the 2-year mark, John came down with this terrible case of pneumonia, and it forced him to leave the military early. And so when John was medically discharged, he came back home, and he had no idea what he was going to do. I mean, he anticipated staying in the Navy for some time, not just 2 years. But luckily, Emma stepped in again, and she gave this glowing recommendation of John to one of her very wealthy friends, basically saying, hey, you should hire John. And this wealthy friend of Emma's agreed and hired John, and John was so happy, so relieved. I mean, Emma has totally picked him up again. But after getting hired, John would make a totally stupid mistake. He would steal this really expensive plate from this wealthy friend, and he would get caught. And this wealthy friend, they didn't just scold John and make him give the plate back. They got the police involved, and ultimately John would be sent to prison for 6 months for the theft. And when John got out again, he was certain nobody was going to hire him. I mean, he just went to jail for stealing. But that was when Emma, for a third time, stepped in and helped John again. Emma was a big believer in forgiving people and giving them additional chances when they screwed up. And so she said to John, you know what? I understand you made a mistake. Why don't you come back to the Glen and work for me? You can be our butler. John couldn't believe it. I mean, he knew he did not deserve this chance, especially from Emma, who's now been done wrong by him multiple times. But, he was so grateful, and he said to Emma, I'll take this, of course, and I will do anything you want, no matter what. I will do the best possible job. I'm not going to screw this up. And so far, that was exactly what John had done since coming back to the Glen. He did whatever Emma wanted, and that included nightly prayers. So on this night, after John walked into the dining room, he took a seat next to Emma at the table, and then after Elizabeth and the other two elderly maids took their seats at the table, they all held hands and they bowed their heads, and then Emma began to lead them in prayer. When the service was over, the two maids got up and headed to the kitchen to make a cup of hot cocoa for Emma. Emma typically stayed up really, really late, basically later than anybody else in the house, and she liked to drink hot cocoa and just sit by the fire and, read and write letters. It was just kind of her time to be alone and to be left alone. And so after the maids had gone, John stood up too, and he said goodnight to Emma and told her to enjoy the rest of her night, and then he made his way into the kitchen and he went into the pantry, which doubled as his bedroom. And once in the pantry, he pulled out his cot, climbed under the covers, and he fell asleep. A few hours later, at about 3:30 in the morning, John suddenly woke up in the pantry to the sound of somebody screaming outside the door. And so John, he burst out of the pantry door, and right away he's looking in the kitchen, and it's just completely covered in smoke. He can barely see, but not far from him in the kitchen was his sister and also one of the maids. And they were the ones screaming. And they were actually screaming at John to wake up and go get everybody. We need to get them out of the house and get some help. And so John, his first instinct is, okay, clearly there's a fire or something. And Emma, she's upstairs and she could be in trouble. And so John, he instinctively ran towards the stairs and began going up to the second floor to save Emma. But as he went up the stairs, the other maid was coming down the stairs looking totally frantic. And she would tell John that she was just in Emma's bedroom and she couldn't see Emma anywhere and her bed was totally on fire. And so she didn't know if Emma was even in there, but it didn't look good. And so John, at this point, he turned and went with that maid back to the kitchen where they linked up with John's sister and that other maid. And the four of them filled up buckets of water and tried to run back up the stairs to attempt to put out the fire that was in Emma's bedroom. But by the time they got back upstairs, the fire up there had really spread, and there was like a wall of fire right in front of Emma's bedroom. So there was no way to really get through it, and their little buckets of water did nothing. And so even though they hated the idea of leaving Emma potentially behind, the four of them knew they couldn't do anything more. And so finally, the four of them turned and began running downstairs to evacuate. And as they...
Think somebody tried to kill Emma?
Yeah.
Like, this was a plot.
If her bed itself
is on fire.
It's on fire. Most of the fire seems like it's starting from her room.
Because why would a random fire start from the room? Only thing I guess, especially back those times, candles. Yeah. Maybe, you know what I'm saying? Because it's in the 1800s. So basically, candle, they have lights and stuff like, you know what I'm saying, like we do now. So carrying a candle around, candle could, if it's an accident, you get what I'm saying? Sure. But her bed being on fire?
Yeah, that's what I'm
thinking. That's weird.
That's odd, yeah.
Like, who would have... And then when you coming down, you say, hey, I try to see... That also looks funny. Because the fire just started, so how you can't... And the homes typically back then were made out of... Well, this is England. We learned some stuff the other day, so...
Yeah.
And so finally, the four of them turned and began running downstairs to evacuate. And as they ran through the dining room on the first floor, they would find Emma. She was laying on the ground, sprawled out, and it was obvious to all four of them that she was clearly dead. However, it was also obvious that the fire had not killed her. She had clearly been hacked to death. She had all these horrible wounds on her head that looked like somebody had taken an axe basically to her head, and her neck was so deeply cut, it was almost like someone tried to remove her head. What? John and Elizabeth and the two maids just stood there staring in shock at Emma, not even sure what to do. And then one of the maids just started screaming, and then all four of them just turned and ran out of the house. Eventually, some neighbors, some local fishermen, and members of the Coast Guard were able to put out the fire at the Glen. But this was not just a fire, this was a murder. And so when police came to investigate, suspicion immediately fell on John. This was back in the day, well before forensic science was used in investigations. And so at the time, the way police kind of figured out who done it is by intuition and gut feeling and assumptions. I mean, it was basically like pseudoscience. But at the time, that's how it was. And quickly, the police determined that whoever had killed Emma and inflicted these horrible injuries on her, they had to be really strong. And so the assumption was, John is the only man in the house, and so very likely the strongest person in the house. And so he must have been the one to do this, because it didn't look like anybody else had the strength to do this. Also, the investigators found these blood trails underneath the rubble from the fire that showed Emma had not actually been murdered where she was found on the ground in the dining room. Instead, she had actually been killed in the hallway near the stairs, which was not far from the pantry where John slept. And basically right outside of John's pantry door was a bloody hatchet and a bloody knife. And on top of all of that, Investigators also determined that the fire had been set intentionally, and the person who set it had used this particular type of oil that was very flammable, and they had doused it all over the house and ignited it. And it turned out the only place where this oil was located inside of the Glen was inside of the pantry where John slept. So, on the same day this whole fire breaks out and they find Emma dead, John was arrested for Emma's murder.
But even that's just speculations. That's not. I get it. It was the timing, but that doesn't give me hardcore evidence of yes, he did it.
Are we just going off? Okay.
Gut feeling, intuition types.
Like, cause things are not always
what the eyes appears to be.
So I'm like, but yeah, it's the timing. It's the
Cause I'm like the oil.
Like, okay, if you already planned to do this, if it was something planned, you would have already got that out beforehand.
But who out of everybody would have the motive? Out of hearing John's backstory, I think he has the least motive. Mm-hmm. Why he right here? Why does he go get his food and bring it literally right here and eat? They can hear him crunching and munching. But
I'm wondering. Well, never mind. I'm not gonna put nothing on her.
It.
No, because I was like, I'm wondering, does Elizabeth have any, or Beth, whatever they call her for sure. Elizabeth probably have like any type of motive for anything. Like,
or does any of the other?
Or any of the other ones? Like, I don't know.
Cause I'm like, why y'all speculating that only a man can kill her that way?
I mean, because at the end of the day, I mean, she'll be an older woman, but another younger woman would be able to have some type of strength to do whatever. So, I mean, I don't know.
Because I'm like, what she did? Have y'all not heard about Lizzie Borden?
Yeah.
I'm saying during this time, when did she commit her murders? 1892 afterwards.
Yeah.
She did hers in 1892, and she was young girl.
She was young, yeah.
And she killed her mama and her father and her stepmother.
I think, yeah.
Lizzie Borden had her gave her father 40 waxings. Something like that. That's something like that.
Yeah.
This whole fire breaks out and they find Emma dead. John was arrested for Emma's murder. The next day, John was in his jail cell, and a guard came down the hall and rapped on the bars and told John he had a visitor. His lawyer was here to talk to him, but John was confused because he didn't have a lawyer, so he had no idea who this was. But regardless, the guard opened up the cell, and he led John down the hallway to this room, and when John walked in, he saw there was this man who was very well dressed and very handsome. He was sitting at this table, and clearly he was waiting for John. And John, at first, he didn't really know who this guy was. But then it dawned on him that he knows who this guy is, and it made no sense that he was here to defend John. The man's name was Reginald Templar, and he was a very successful lawyer, highly respected in the area, and he also happened to be one of Emma's absolute closest friends. So Reginald Templar, Emma's close friend, the woman who's been murdered, is here to defend the person who's accused of killing Emma. It just didn't make any sense. But eventually, Reginald gestured for John to come in the room and sit down. And so John just kind of made his way in and he sat down. And Reginald immediately said, "John, I know you did not kill Emma. That's why I'm here." John was so relieved, and before long, he was pouring out all the information he could about everything he could recall about the night of the fire and the murder. And as he did, Reginald took all these notes, and he began creating a framework for John's defense. And so by the time John was back in his jail cell, he couldn't help but feel kind of optimistic that maybe with Reginald's help, he could actually beat this thing and prove he didn't do this. But John's relief would be short-lived. His first court appearance went extremely well. Reginald showed up in a fancy suit, and he was just completely on his game and just ripped the prosecution apart and basically said their entire case was just circumstantial, and he rattled off all these legal precedents, which John didn't really understand, but he looked up and saw the judge definitely knew these precedents and was impressed with what Reginald was doing. And then also Reginald would say that the police did a terrible job investigating. They basically didn't investigate and just jumped to conclusions that it was John. And so as Reginald is basically destroying the prosecution, Reginald looked over at the prosecutor, and he could tell the prosecutor looked really nervous. And so John was really starting to feel confident that Reginald was exactly what he needed. But on the day of the second court appearance, Reginald just didn't show up with no explanation. He didn't contact anybody. And so John just sat there waiting to see what was going to happen. The judge delayed for as long as he could. But eventually, when, Reginald still didn't show up, the judge looked to John and said, "I'm sorry, but you're going to have to defend yourself." Which, of course, John did not know how to do. I mean, he barely had even gone to school, let alone studied law. And from there, things only got worse for John. Reginald continued to miss court dates with no explanation, and then on other times he would show up to court, but instead of being this fantastic, very sharp lawyer, he kind of acted like a maniac. He would start all these unnecessary fights with the judge over totally irrelevant matters, like how to pronounce a particular word, and then when he had witnesses on the stand, his line of questioning didn't make any sense. He would ask things like, "Well, what did you have for breakfast today?" and "What's your favorite color?" And then finally, Reginald just withdrew altogether from the case, leaving John with no lawyer at all, which admittedly might have actually been an improvement for John. After Reginald withdrew, another lawyer found out about it and took pity on John and volunteered to take on the case. But it was on very short notice, and this other lawyer had good intentions, but was not nearly as skilled as Reginald was when he was kind of on his game on that first day. And so really quickly, this lawyer kind of fumbled the case. And then when it went to the jury to decide whether or not John was guilty, it took them less than an hour to come back and say, "Oh yeah, he's guilty. He killed Emma." And so John was sentenced to death by hanging. For the next 3 months, John sat in his jail cell waiting for his execution. And as he waited, he continually insisted that he really was innocent and that ultimately God would protect him. Finally, February 23rd, 1885 rolled around. This was the day of John's execution, except something very weird happened on this day. When John was led from the jail to the gallows where he was going to be executed, the hangman could not get the gallows to work. The trap door in the gallows where the condemned stands, where it's supposed to open up and they fall down and the noose breaks their neck, that trap door, it would not function whenever John was standing on it. Now, when John was moved off the trap door, it functioned perfectly fine. It was only when he was on that trap door that it would not work. And so think about this. Pretend you're John. 3 different times, the hangman led him onto that trapdoor. Wow. They put the noose around his neck, put a bag over his head, asked him for his last words, and they threw that lever, and each time John is expecting to die, and it's not working. Finally, after the 3rd failure, the hangman just called off the execution.
That's crazy. You know how, I'm like, you know how many, literally, you piss your pants with doing that. You know what I'm saying? You have to. You just because you expecting I'm gone. Yeah. You piss and shit yourself, type shit. You know what I'm saying? And it's not working.
For the impact.
Yeah, and it's not working. You what the?
What's happening? What's?
That's crazy. But I wonder why Reginald all of a sudden
started acting
switch outrageous up. You come in. I'm were you trying to throw it on purpose? Also, we gotta understand the times. Was somebody paying you?
Yeah.
And you
somebody, yeah.
I have to show up, but let me show up and throw the case on purpose,
That doesn't make sense, but yeah.
Who knows?
Actually, a judge would weigh in and say, "You know what? We cannot possibly attempt for a 4th time to execute John. This constitutes cruel and unusual punishment." And so they swapped his sentence from a death sentence to 22 years in prison. And none of this would make any sense until one day, 6 years after Emma's murder, when John, by this point, was just sitting in a jail cell and everybody had forgotten about him. On that day in 1890, a group of very high society type people, politicians and lawyers and rich people, they all gathered in this misty cemetery not far from the Glen. The group was in the cemetery for the burial of a very important and well-respected man who had died after slowly going insane. And as the priest finished his final blessing, the mourners began chucking handfuls of dirt into the grave, and as they did, one of them said quietly but out loud, "Today we have buried a murderer." Here's what many people believe really happened on the night of November 15th, 1884, when Emma was killed. At the time of Emma's murder,
Reginald killed her.
That's what I like. Cause you come to me.
He's going.
You come to me. You was like, I know you didn't kill her.
So I'm gonna work to get you. But
and then something switched in his head. Yeah, because
he was going crazy.
If that's not the case,
and he was blacking out. He also having brain. That's the reason why some days he would go to court. Some days
if he was in court, he was acting like you know.
It's Reginald, bro. Damn, that's crazy. That's the only person at this point. We done watched how many Mr. Ballen videos. At this point, you got to go with the assumption that Reginald did it. He ain't gonna bring him up for no reason.
That's what I'm saying. It has to be. He has brought up no more names. Just John, Elizabeth, and Reginald.
Elizabeth makes sense because that was his sister.
But now that we know that it's a he.
Yeah.
The night of November 15th, 1884, when Emma was killed. At the time of Emma's murder, Elizabeth's pregnancy was very scandalous, but not just for Elizabeth. It was also scandalous for the father of the baby.
Yes.
The father who nobody knew except for Elizabeth. And it was scandalous for this father because, like Elizabeth, he was worried what society would think if they found out he was having a baby out of wedlock. Especially with Elizabeth, who basically from a societal standpoint was kind of below his station. But despite all that, the father of the baby did not attempt to distance himself from Elizabeth. Instead, on the night of the murder, the father of the baby actually decided to sneak into the Glen to see Elizabeth.
And Emma found
out. You know, she's super religious, so
and she probably confronted them. Because also Elizabeth already knew. She probably already knew that she was dead. That Emma was dead. That's the reason why they were screaming for John. And man, hold on. Let's just see. I'm sorry, y'all.
The father of the baby actually decided to sneak into the Glen to see Elizabeth. But Emma was still awake. She was up late, drinking her hot cocoa, writing and reading, and she heard the sound of the father coming into her home. And so she got up to go investigate, and she would eventually find the father up in the hallway right outside of Elizabeth's bedroom. And remember, Emma is very traditional, she's very conservative and religious, and she's seeing this strange man in her house clearly going into or coming out of Elizabeth's room, and she was so offended and angry, and so Emma just began screaming at this guy to get out of her house, and if he didn't, she was going to tell the whole world about this illicit relationship. And then Emma walked up and hit this guy right in the face. And at this point, the father just snapped. And he flew into this rage and he began screaming back at Emma. And then he grabbed a hatchet that was on the wall right near the pantry. He pulled it off and he brought it down right on top of Emma's head. And Emma crumpled to the ground. And the man, he's looking down at Emma and he's realizing he's inflicted this horrific injury on Emma. And if she doesn't die, she's going to tell someone. And then this father is going to go to jail, if not worse. So in a moment of panic, this father runs into the kitchen, gets a kitchen knife, comes back, and he finished Emma off. Once she was deceased, he dragged her back to the dining room where she normally did her reading and writing, and then he doused her and the whole house in that weird oil that he found in the pantry where John was sleeping, and after getting the whole house covered in it, he ignited it, and then he ran out of the house. But over the next 6 years, Emma's killer felt so bad about what he had done, both to Emma and then nearly killing Elizabeth and his unborn child, that he went completely insane, and this caused his physical health to totally fail, and he died. But right before he died, as he's laying in his deathbed, he began ranting and raving about all the things he regretted in his life, including murdering a woman at a big, beautiful seaside estate. Basically, he was admitting to killing Emma, and he did it in the company of all the people who would then be at his burial. And so that's why, as they're throwing the dirt onto his casket, they're saying, "Today we buried a murderer." The killer's identity was none other than Reginald Templar, John's lawyer. Now, nobody knows if Reginald took John's case because he felt guilty and wanted to prevent an innocent man from going to jail, or if he just wanted to sabotage John's case to ensure he did go to jail to protect himself. We don't know. Either way, though, it was during the course of this trial that Reginald began his
Or the fact that that's my child's brother. So also, I know he's innocent. I know he's a good guy. I also know the pain and agony that my the mother of my child, I don't want to say baby mama,
honestly,
is going through, why she's just now getting pregnant. So that stress,
yeah,
not only with losing Emma, but also her brother's going to, so that stress on her that's causing stress. Also, she might know that you are the one who killed her. And so she's dealing with all this stress, which can affect the child. So he's like, hey, I have to, but also he's like dealing with all this mental because he's killed somebody. He's not a killer. Everybody can't deal with that, you know? I don't know, man.
Don't know. Either way, though, it was during the course of this trial that Reginald began his descent into madness, which would ultimately lead to his death. Some people believe the reason the gallows malfunctioned every time John stood on that trapdoor and it wouldn't open was because of divine intervention. That God or a god or some deity came to earth and literally interfered with the execution to spare John's life. And the reason people think that is because, John really was an innocent man and he did not deserve to die. John would serve all 22 years of his sentence, and then when he got out, he became famous for being the man who could not be hanged. John would eventually get married and he would move to America, where he would live a very happy and quiet life until he died at the age of 81.
That's what's up.
81.
That's what's up.
Hey everybody, as mentioned...
That's crazy, bro.
I hate he had to do 22 years or something that
he didn't do. Reginald did it. All the clues make sense, though. Like...
I'm like, dang.
And then he possibly throw the trial because he didn't want, like, you know what I'm saying?
It could be, honestly, it could have been a mixture of everything, especially with now your mind is just like all over the place. It's going, you just took someone's life, something that you've never done before, the person that you took, and then it's like you said with the mother, Elizabeth, you about to get ready to have a child. Like, it's a lot.
Stress.
I'm like, honey, everyone sleeps hard. Like, no one heard anything.
Unless he did. I don't know. You got to also understand the times. Like.
I'm just saying because, especially with the hall, how you say the hall was right by the pantry. I'm like, John didn't hear anything. They was right
doors
outside.
And the walls could have been made
right
thick.
Outside the door, Elizabeth's door. Like,
it could have been thick doors.
I mean,
thick,
I get
walls too.
Yeah, I get that. I'm just saying, like, nothing. Like,
so Elizabeth didn't know this whole time
that it was Reginald.
Yeah, God, she had to.
If he never made it into the room to even for her to know that he was for her to know that he was there, then I guess she wouldn't have known. That's what I said. That's the point I was trying to make. Like, no one heard anything because that would be the only way that she would have known. Like, True. If she did get to see him, or if she heard something, a commotion outside her door.
So why would he even try to go douse the whole house knowing you're pregnant?
Because you just like, I gotta save myself.
True.
Trying to hide evidence or.
But still, that's your child. She's like pregnant. That's still your child. So if she never made it out. I guess you expected everybody to make it out anyway. And
then I'm thinking, how long do you think that you would have been able to keep that secret?
He honestly probably would have got away with that this whole time.
Not taking Emma's life. I'm talking about if you did none of that with Elizabeth being pregnant and her having the child. And people
you saying people not knowing
like,
that she's pregnant?
Who was the father? Yeah,
you talking about that
situation. Like, I'm just with that. Like, it's only so long you can hide that for. But.
Also, I do hate the thing when it comes down to class and you can't date. Like, you love who you love. You fall in love with who you fall in love with. You get, like, it doesn't necessarily matter when it comes down to class.
But I guess it was also a thing, the fact that they wasn't married either. And with that being such a big thing in those times.
Honestly, even if he wanted to marry her, they wouldn't allow it because of the class. Especially those times. Even, like, probably still today, people still practice that. Like, you have to be of this class. You can't go below your, you know what I'm saying? Like, you shouldn't date somebody else. We even see that nowadays, even on social media, of a financial level. You can't date somebody below your financial means. You see those debates all the time. You know, like, a guy got to be making this amount of money. I never date a guy or a guy, you know what I'm saying? Like, we still a lot of certain things are practiced, but in different ways.
Yeah.
It's still practiced to this day. And then to find out that she's pregnant, it was gonna hurt him and her. She possibly could have lost her job. He would have probably got shone in the public eye. And then even if he wanted to marry her, people still would have looked at them weirdly because he's like, they would have been like, you're this such rich, famous, popular lawyer. Yeah. You get a cook pregnant.
Yeah,
like what is your problem? So
yeah, sadly.
And you got to deal with, like, and that's a lot of. I guess that's why he freaked out. But then she probably, I don't know if she looked at him as an intruder. But then he says that Reginald knew Emma.
That's what he said. Unless, going back to maybe it being a little dark and her not like really realizing who it was.
But when she screamed or something, she got. But what you said was, why didn't nobody hear? Because my thing is, if you not recognizing who it is, shouldn't you scream and try to get your maids? John being the man of the house, being the butler, man of the house. What do you think?
Again.
But
you going,
nobody.
Maybe, like you said, the wall stick. You said it.
Yeah, I know I said it earlier.
You said the walls made me think so.
Like you always say. Them. Like you always say.
I'm like somebody.
Like you always say every time after we turn the camera, I need more time to think on certain things because just reacting and speaking right now.
But I'm thinking now, and I'm like, maybe people do sleep a little hard. I don't know because I always be talking about like my mama. Honey, something could happen. My mama won't hear a thing.
True.
You can come and take the bed from under her, honey. She wouldn't feel a thing. So. I don't know.
They don't tell us, man.
There's no telling.
Hey, man.
But also, he went in the pantry and got the oil.
Exactly. And John didn't wake up. But
Oh.
how big is the pantry though?
That's the thing. I don't know how big
is it big enough for him? Because John obviously sleeps and that's his living.
In it, yeah.
That's his living quarters. So obviously the pantry is.
It has to be
massive.
some type of stuff. Yeah, unless it's not that big, and I don't know. It has to be a little spacious or something. And he was just that sneaky.
Nah.
I don't know. That's a little strange.
Because even unless he just, or also unless he's that familiar with the home, because obviously he's been coming in and out of that bit a lot, so he probably knew where the oil was. He probably been in that pantry, but John didn't know him. John just not like that.
Right, he didn't know.
I don't know, man.
So
this is one I'm gonna have to ponder on.
He could have been coming to the house like that.
Not frequently, not enough to be recognized. That you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like he may have.
So how was him and Elizabeth relationship? Was Elizabeth sneaking out too?
Like where did she like?
Where they were like?
Or where was they?
Where were they meeting that to be able to court each other? Just
court each other. That's a good. I guess that's a good one. Good question.
Where were they able? Because obviously not in Emma's house. Emma ain't
having it. Emma was not having it. No.
So she had to be sneaking away a little bit too.
Yeah, I don't.
And I wonder, is Emma younger than John?
I would like to know how old Emma was.
John was 20.
Yeah.
He said 6 years prior.
He said 6 years prior. He was 14.
So you just added up 20.
Yeah.
And the way it looks like as Emma was younger than John. The way everything just sounded.
Yeah.
Sound like he was the older brother type. I don't know.
That's a lot.
It's a lot to ponder on, man. Y'all spam us up in the comments, man. Let us know y'all thoughts about it in the comment section down below for us. But as always, I have to go by the name DJ New Kid. This is
Sierra Nicole.
Why? You know what I'm talking about. Yo, what's good, original? You ready? It's always I go. All because of you. All because of you. That's your fault.
Okay.
I do go with the name DJ New Kid. This is
Sierra Nicole.
You are?
Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack and flip for my folks. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me.